Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be reacting to Fastest Way to Learn Coding and Actually Get a Job by Power Couple. Yep, so before we get started, make sure you smash the like button for the YouTube algorithm and subscribe in the down below. Why not? Okay, yeah, let's get started.
From the day I wrote my first Hello World program, it took me 2 years to land a job at Amazon and another 2 years to get into Google. That's because I did all this with no computer science degree or bootcamp. I made countless mistakes along the way which made
Well, getting a job at Google or Amazon is still good, so and I think he just learned it by himself. Okay, so applause to him, because that's one of the big companies to get into as a software engineer.
bad to become a software engineer longer than it should have been. I watched countless YouTube tutorials, paid for numerous Udemy courses and spent hundreds of hours learning things that didn't add any value.
That's
If
true.
I could go back in time,
That's the thing, like there are so many open free sources online, but it's always like, it's just the difficult thing is finding something that's useful, right? That's the most important thing, because there's so many open sources out there. It's like, it's differentiating which is actually good compared to like bad, right? So that's the thing.
undo all the things that don't work, I would be in the exact same situation as today within 6 months of starting programming. That's exactly why I made this video. Today, I'll remove all the useless fluff and give you the fastest path to go from a beginner to a full-time software engineer. Before I begin, there are 3 major mistakes that can slow down your progress to become a full-time software engineer. I'll also share these 3 mistakes along the way, so stay tuned for that. As a new programmer, the first decision you need to make is which programming language to learn.
True.
To answer that question, let's talk about what a beginner wants from a programming language. Number 1, the language should be easy and intuitive to write. It should not require learning in
Also, choosing the first language is the most important thing, because having a strong foundation in like a programming language is useful when you're expanding into other different languages, right? Because you could always refer back to that language, your first language, or the language that you learned fully, because it always acts as like a solid foundation towards your career as a software engineer.
complex syntax. It should be as close as possible to writing in English. Next, the programming language should be versatile
You should
and
be
have
fluent.
many
You
applications.
should be fluent with the
As a
programming
beginner,
language.
you don't want to learn a new programming language for every new project you want to build.
That's right.
In other words, the language should have great returns for the time you invest on learning it. Lastly, the programming language should be fast to write. You shouldn't have to waste time spelling.
So in terms like, you should pick a language that's more versatile, right? So you could do like front end, back end, and like all of that, right? So it's like a language that could be utilized in multiple ways, rather than always swapping into something. So like in Java, you could write in Android, and you could write Windows software in Java. You could write APIs in Java and all of that. Whereas some language like Flutter is just for an Android or iOS development. It doesn't do anything with like APIs or anything like that, right? So that's why.
Put the declaration of a new variable or simple iteration through a list. In other words, it should be concise and get job done in minimum lines of code. Some of you
That's
might
right.
have already guessed it. Python is a language that solves
It's the
all these
easiest way.
problems.
It's the
almost as
easiest
easy as
language
writing in
that when
English.
you're starting,
So
because the syntax isn't as complicated as other languages, and it's very similar to like English languages, right? Or pseudocode. So that's why, as a first language, I would recommend Python as well.
different applications like web development, data science, and automation. Python is extremely fast to write.
And also Python is like, I think it's the second popular language nowadays, and it's also the fastest growing language since it was launched. So yeah.
Compared with other popular languages. That's because it requires less lines of code for the same amount of code. As an example, here is the same code written in Java versus
yeah.
Python.
That's
For me
true.
personally, I started out with learning Java. I used to do all my coding
Oh,
interviews
same with them, same with me as well. Like my first language was Java, so I learned everything in Java. Then I learned Python third or second, I believe. Python is a lot easier because you don't have to write everything as object-oriented. You can still write it as Pascal or scripted code. So whereas in Java, everything is object-oriented, so you have to create a class for every single script that you write. Whereas in Python, you don't have to. It doesn't have to be an object-oriented program. You could just be a normal Pascal program. So that's why.
Java. Recently, I switched to using Python and it improved my interview performance by at least 2 times because it's so fast to write. Having said that, Java and other popular languages have their own advantages. And
Also, having said that, Java still remains the most popular up to like today. Java is number one, then Python. So yeah, because the problem is that all the legacy system, everything, and all the old software still uses Java. And nowadays, only like new companies are slowly moving or transferring into Python, but they still need like Java developers to maintain all the old system and the software that they have currently developed, right? So that's the thing.
Have to learn another language at some point in your career, but I do believe that Python would be the best language to start with. Now that we know we should learn Python, let's talk about how to do it. And this is where most new programmers make the first major mistake that slows them down. The mistake most beginners make is that they learn by watching others code. Let me
That's
explain
true.
this by telling you how most people.
Well, when I started coding, I never watched YouTube or anything. I just looked at what's it I think Java, that was a Python. You know, in the Python website, there was some like the syntax code and the APIs that Python does, and all the libraries just in that Python documentation in the official Python website, right? That I just use them as like a referring point, as like a dictionary if you think of it that way, right? So if I just come up with some questions on myself, like Fibonacci equation, or like do a Fibonacci sequence, or factorial calculation or something like that, then I just refer to the documentation from the Python official website and refer like what syntax or what operation I could use, and that's valid in Python to just do that. Whereas if you're looking at some other YouTubers or like some other people's code, you will pick up their bad habit that they were, like they didn't know about. So that's the thing, you're always like picking some other people's bad habits.
On programming, most newbies would go to a course provider like Udemy and look up for Python courses. Then they pick one of these 20+ hours courses, thinking that these courses are long and detailed.
That's the thing, like you always have to remember, like some of these courses on like Udemy and stuff, most of them are money oriented rather than like content oriented, whereas like YouTube, most people will do it because they like programming and they want to create videos and they will enjoy it, right? Whereas like Udemy and stuff, you're charging them for that lecture or for the notes. So in that case, they might prioritize money over like useful content, and they might not revise what they're doing. So that's another thing.
And then they never end up finishing the course. That's because 20 hours of content is not the same as 20 hours of great content.
Yeah.
Some people will go to YouTube and watch someone else code without ever writing any code themselves.
That's why.
And watching these tutorials,
coding isn't about observing and watching what other people. It's all about you getting involved and just typing. Like, it's better if you spend 20 hours doing the code yourself rather than watching someone else, because you will pick up so much more information doing something by like doing yourself than watching other people. It's like play the game rather than watch other people play the game, right? It's the same concept.
gives them a false sense of progress. That's because coding in your head is very different from actually writing down the code and debugging the errors. So what is the right?
It's like maths. It's basically what maths is. Like when you're watching, or when you're in your maths class, when you watch your teacher do it on the whiteboard, it's different to when you actually do it by hand, because you make so many errors that you might not see what your teacher or your lecturer has done on the whiteboard. And same with programming, you won't know everything until you actually put it into practice.
To do it, the answer is very simple. You should learn by coding.
That's true.
You can go to this free
Just
website
open your IDE and just type coding, just typing, that's what it is. It just depends on the amount of hours that you put in.
Don't worry about data science tutorials or any other advanced tutorials.
That's it, just look at the documentation.
Right now, you would not be able to remember them until you have actually applied them on a real world problem. You can always come back to learn advanced concepts in the future.
That's why, that's also another thing, all the libraries and all the data structures and algorithms that you would study, you won't actually remember any of them unless you put it into a scenario and practice doing it and practice applying that concept into something that's useful in real life or something like that, right? Or for example, creating a website. In a website, you would use a stack for when the user goes to the next page, and when they go previously, you use a stack to pop what they did before, right? So that's how stack works. You're applying stack in that concept when you make a website tracker, basically when you keep on how many times the user went to the next page, and when they want to go back, you just pop that page from the stack container.
You need them for your projects. If you look at a lesson, each lesson first explains a basic concept and then asks you to apply these concepts to a problem. Feel free to play with the sample code. Think about other problems you can solve with the concepts you just learned and try to solve.
And also, these sample code are simple. This is just for you to initially understand the syntax and understand how the concept of this techniques and the structures, data structures. Right? After that, you could apply that into a real life application or problem.
exercise portion. Once you are done with the basics, you are good to move on to the next steps. In the spirit of learning by coding, we would do some projects in Python next. In the beginning, it's very hard to do something on your own, so we'll take help from the experts. So go to YouTube and look up this video called 12 Beginner Python Projects by FreeCodeCamp, which by the way is a great channel to follow.
I have
In
no
this
idea if
video,
it's good or not,
they
but
built 12 beginner Python projects from scratch. These projects include building Mad Libs, Tic-Tac-Toe, Minesweeper, etc.
yeah,
and all of
these
them are
are
very
good.
interesting. They walk you through the implementation of all these projects step by step, making it very easy to.
And also, like, don't just stop after watching it. Try and implement it yourself without rewatching the video. Like, or maybe take that couple of notes of the data structure or the concept that they use for example, Tic-Tac-Toe. What data structure did they use to do it? How did they do it? How did they visualize it into Python? And how to do that? Take notes and just don't look back at the video. Just program it yourself and see how far you get. That's like, yeah. And don't just give up after, like, if you're stuck once, then just give up. Google like other resources. There's like communities such as Stack Overflow and all of other GitHub. There's sample work in GitHub. Look at other people's work and get inspiration from that. Because you could come up with something much better or like something different, but you still would get the end results. So you just like don't get influenced by one person. Like, programming is like a piece of work, isn't it? It's where you get influenced by everyone else and just make your own piece of work from that.
But before you start watching this tutorial, there are two things you should know. One, you should not watch this tutorial casually. Follow along if you really want to learn programming and become a software engineer.
The way I would do it is just like what I said, just take notes, because you could just copy and paste what they say. You might not focus, because somebody who does touch typing, you could just watch that, just type what they're doing line by line without you understand. So it's better just take like a couple of bullet point notes on a piece of paper, then do that again, like after the video's finished, just program again. So
you need something called Integrated Development Environment, or IDE, to build these projects. IDE, in simplest terms, is an application where you can write and run your code. There are several popular IDEs for Python. This tutorial uses VS Code, so you might
I
want
used
to download VS
Java,
Code and
was
set
it
it up for Python
Untitled
before
Chapter
starting on
from
this
Chapter?
tutorial. Once you have completed this tutorial, you are ready to work on your own projects. Working on building your own projects will help you in multiple ways. Number one, it will introduce you to how software engineers work in the real world. You will write code that will fail, and you will debug it and repeat it over and over again. This is exactly what a day in the life of a software engineer looks like.
Also, don't get demotivated when your code runs into error if the code fails, because that's casual. Like, even though I have like 7+ years of coding, I still run into like bugs and stuff, because that's how you learn, and you should always run into bugs, because you get better by solving those bugs and making that bug be more efficient, right? That's the thing.
Number two, you'll build a portfolio of projects by doing this. You
Put it
can
on
post your
GitHub,
code on GitHub and put the link in your resume. This will help you attract recruiters and get your resume shortlisted. Lastly, building your own projects will give you confidence that you are ready to tackle new challenges as a software engineer. But what?
Yeah, that's the thing. It's all about confidence. And when you have 100 hours of just practice on coding, you're different compared to people who have like 10,000 hours of coding experience, because they would have more experience, and like they could talk to anyone about any problems, and they could come up with all the because you remember the concept that you learned and how you could sort of use those concepts to solve your errors or something, like all the problems that you that came to you when you're doing your practice coding stuff, practice questions and stuff. So it's always better it's always better to practice.
What projects should you work on? You can think of any projects that you find interesting, but here are some examples I found. You can build a web crawler, or an alarm clock, or maybe an app that gives you Wikipedia articles.
Or a timetable.
Some example projects that I built were
Card
a
game.
spam filter, an algorithmic trading engine, and an e-commerce website.
Yeah.
Now you
Website
have a great
is,
resume, and you're confident about your programming skills. Let's
Smart alarm is also good as well.
start applying for software engineer positions. Wait a second. This is actually the second major mistake new programmers make. You see, in an ideal world, having good programming skills and a great resume is all you should need to become a software engineer. But unfortunately for us, tech companies like to play games with us in the interviews. They ask you specific kind of.
That's the thing. Like when you apply for an interview and stuff, they ask for like some interview questions that you're not familiar with, but you know the concept. But because the way they structure, or like the way they explain the task, it might not come to you. So it's better to always like refresh. Like was interview question using HackerRank or other Angler as well, I believe, something like that. So it's like I just use those was the interview question websites to get some practice from the interview, because you need to get familiar with the question style, so you understand what they're asking. Even though you might know the concept, you might not be able to apply the concept that you know because you don't understand the question. That's the thing.
Programming questions in the interviews. If you don't prepare for these questions, you might not get the expected results. So let's see how to prepare for the interviews. All the interviews are based on this one course that is taught to all computer science graduates. This course is called Data Structures and Algorithms. Fortunately for us, Google has created this course and made it available for free on Udacity. And the best part is that this course is taught in Python. In this 4-week course, you'll learn about different algorithms related to searching and sorting. You'll learn about data structures like maps, trees, and graphs. Don't worry if you don't know any of these terms right now. I'm sure that by the end of this course, you'll be a pro. For that, just
also, when you're going to like go into it, they always like to ask about graphs, so like breadth first search and depth first search. Sometimes you store search as well. So if you like, most of the time Google does like to ask those type of questions. So it's better to practice if you have like a Google interview. Make sure you practice graph data structures, because that's what it's most likely to be.
Things in mind. 1. Be regular and finish this course. As I mentioned earlier, most people start courses and never finish them. So make
Always,
sure you take small
that's the
steps
thing. Like before, like don't just do it for the money. If you like, don't just become a software engineer because you get a 6-figure salary, right? Always just do it because you like coding and you like solving problems. You like logic, maths and stuff. But just do it. Always do it because you enjoy it, right? Don't do it just for the money, because after 10 years of working, you will get bored of it, and it's like you will get so annoyed of it that you just go into depression or something like that, right? Like, why would you kill yourself? It's just better to do something that you like. So yeah.
And make regular progress. 2. Make sure you complete all the exercises they give you in this course. As I've already said many times, the only way to learn coding is by doing. So implement the algorithms by yourself if you can, and finish all the assignments. Trust me when I say this, when it comes to interviewing for entry-level jobs, this course is the only difference between you and someone who dropped more than $100,000 on a computer science degree. So if you finish this course, you'll be pretty much on par with someone who has a CS degree when you interview. After completing this course on data structures and algorithms, you have all the foundation knowledge you need to tackle the interviews. In order to sharpen your interview skills further, you need to practice some questions that have been asked by tech companies in the past. For that, you should use this website called LeetCode. On LeetCode, you will get interview-style questions. You can write your code and test your solution right there on the website.
Hack
It's great for beginners because all the questions are tagged easy, medium, or hard based on difficulty level. If you get a premium subscription of the website, you can also filter questions by the tech company that asked them in the past interviews.
Yeah, that's good.
You should start with easy questions and keep working on
Yeah,
them.
it's always build up
in
on
45
that. It's
minutes.
always like a building
Once
block.
that
Right?
happens, you can move on to the medium questions. When you start
Like
solving
always think about it as like a building, right? If you don't have a solid foundation, it doesn't matter how tall you build. If the foundation collapses, the whole building collapses. So just make sure you have an unbreakable foundation. That's the main concept. It's not just for like coding or something. It's in general for anything that you do in life.
mediums in 45 minutes, you can start applying for software engineering jobs. If you're lucky, you'll get the job right away. For most people, it will be a process full of disappointment and rejections.
Yeah, it's always like you should like. That's why like rejection is not like you shouldn't get discouraged from rejection or anything. It's always just think of it as like a learning step or something like that, because you always do better the next time. So yeah.
And this is where they make the third and the biggest mistake of all. They
Quit
quit.
early, yeah.
The main reason
Never
people give
quit.
up early is because they overthink.
Because if you quit early, you're not gonna reach your potential or your full potential. Because when someone say that you're not worthy, you always try to disprove that. You're always learning something new from that experience, and you will always improve yourself.
Investigate the interview process. After every rejection, they replay the interview over and over again in their head to figure out why they failed and take every rejection personally. To avoid this, stay inside your circle of.
Also, like even if you get rejected, or like don't think about that. Like sometimes because you could do sometimes you would smash an interview, but you still get rejected because sometimes the HR department still wants to show that they're active in their roles, like actively looking for some new recruits, even though the position is full, like they don't need new employees, right? Like don't get discouraged because of that. So just always think as like other companies, because computer science is still the most demanding job it's not just in America or UK, it's like everywhere in the country. So don't worry, there's always other companies that will recruit you.
And try to influence the outcome of your interviews, but never get tangled in the things that you can't control. In other words, do your best to crack the interviews, but try to be detached from the outcome of the interviews. If you want to learn about how I became a software engineer without a computer science degree, watch this video at the top. If you want to see my 5-year coding journey in 5 minutes, you can watch this other video. I'll see you in the next one.
Okay. Yeah. So what the title did say was the fastest way to learn coding and actually get a job, right? So I don't know if he answered that fully. He just said like do a couple of courses and do the coding itself, which doesn't make sense. But it's like I don't know if this answers it fully or if it's like a clickbait title-ish. But I don't know. Well, before that, I would always just say was it practice coding. Just spend hours and hours on your laptop just coding. That's the best way to improve. Like that's what I did before when I started. It's like because at the start I started with Java as well, so I was like I didn't know what object oriented was. I was like, why is there so many classes? I didn't know what inheritance, any of those frameworks. I didn't know any of these things. Tells me, I didn't know how it worked. I was like, how does it work? Like, I couldn't get my brain wrapped around it, so I just started drawing diagrams on this paper and just see like has a like all of those terms and see like I'm like a visual person, so I drew boxes. Then like I went diagram to see how everything matched and stuff. So yeah, it's all about just the time that you put in and make sure like don't chase the price. The price will come when you chase for your understanding. So yeah, that's it. Hope you enjoyed. Make sure you smash the like button for the YouTube algorithm and subscribe. Yeah, cheers. Bye.